Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for June 2nd, 2019. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, please.
Councilmember Brennan.
Here.
Mayor Mars.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras.
Here.
Thank you very much. Before we're going to move to item number 2 here, but just want to make a comment that our Pledge of Allegiance has been a point of discussion for a couple of weeks. A recent community voted by their council not to include that. It looks like after a couple of weeks of discussion, they're going to reconsider that. But from 1892, with George Bloch, that helped format the Pledge of Allegiance, to President Eisenhower on Flag Day, memorialized the Pledge of Allegiance in 1945. It's an expression of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. It's ingrained in what we do for our civic government, even here at the city level, all the way up to the federal government. We will continue to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance at every City of Shakopee City Council meeting. And even as this discussion happens in the recent weeks, here we are on the cusp of our nation's birthday that we call the 4th of July. In a moment, I'm going to call on Troop 116 to come up.
619.
619, excuse me, to help us, lead us in the pledge. And as we teach our Boy Scouts and our youth, our young youth, about the civic responsibility, I think it's important, Pledge of Allegiance, especially in this setting of a city council. So with that, we'll have item number 2, Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll have Troop 6119 come forward. Just stand there.
Right there, yeah.
Next to the face of the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. Let's move on to item number 3, approve of the agenda. Mr. Reynolds, any changes, corrections?
The agenda itself is fine, Mr. Mayor, but I will have something that needs to be corrected when we get to consent business.
Okay. Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4, consent business. Are there any changes, additions, Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, in reviewing the minutes of June 18th, there was an issue under item 10, other business. The particular motion that was voted on passed 4-0 with Councilmember Lehman refusing to vote, and we've got it listed as 5-0, so that will need to be corrected and approved.
And that will go down as 4-0?
Correct.
So noted. Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the consent business as amended.
A second.
I have a motion for the consent business in a second. Before we vote on the consent agenda, we will read the consent agenda into the public record, and Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for July 2nd of 2019. 4A1 approves the minutes from the June 18th, 2019 meeting as amended. 4A2 adopts resolution number R201 TAC 072, which changes the August 6, 2019 council meeting to August 7, 2019, and that's because of Night to Unite. 4A3 authorizes requested street closure, temporary liquor license, and an in-kind donation in support of the Rhythm on the Rails event hosted by the Shakopee Chamber of Commerce. 4A4 adopts resolution number R2019 TAC 071, which transfers the net accumulated rents of $2,084,504.30 for the Community Center, Ice Arena, and Sand Venture from the Park Asset Internal Service Fund to the Building Internal Service Fund. 4B1 authorizes suspension of Ordinance 91.03 to allow hours of operation from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. on August 10, 2019 for the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life event. 4C1 authorizes changing the Public Works Engineering Technician position to a Graduate Engineering position. 4C2 declares property held by the Public Works Department as surplus and authorizes its proper sale or disposal. 4C3 authorizes execution of a professional services agreement with Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors, LLC, for the right-of-way fee update study. 4C4 adopts resolution number R2019, tax 065, which accepts work on the Whispering Oak Sanitary Sewer Extension Project and issues final payment in the amount of $101,700.38 to Northwest Asphalt Incorporated. And finally, 4C5 approves the purchase of 3 2020 Ford Utility Police Interceptor all-wheel drive vehicles from Tin Vorde Motor Company and equipment and setup from Emergency Automotive Technicians Incorporated in the amount of $138,613.20.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. The consent agenda has been read into the public record. With no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now, on this fine second day of July, I'd like to call on item number 5 on any resident that would like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome on an item not on the agenda tonight. Seeing none, we would move forward. Item number 6, business removed from consent, of which there was none. Therefore, we would move to 7A, a public hearing in regard to the Wood Duck Trail Reconstruction Project.
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Contreras to open the public hearing. The public hearing is now open, and Steve will present. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight we are asking you to consider the Wood Duck Trail Reconstruction Project, the improvements for that project. Here we go, wrong slide. And to hold a public hearing based on the requirements of Minnesota Statute 429. This is a city-initiated project as part of the city's reconstruction program. A special note for this section of roadway, it was originally programmed for rehabilitation in 2020 as part of a larger neighborhood project, but it was advanced when the roadway failed this spring, as you all well know. Tonight, we are holding the improvement hearing. The final assessment hearing is expected this fall upon completion of the project. The assessment portion of the project is being guided as indicated under Minnesota Statute 429 for projects that are wholly or partially funded by special assessments. The project area is a short 1,300 feet of Wood Duck Trail. It's bounded by Hohenstein Court on the west and Maple Trail on the east. It should be noted that the adjacent neighborhood roadways to the north of this project area are also planned to be rehabilitated in 2020, so next year.
Reconstructed or rehabilitated?
We are expecting them to be a full depth reconstruction. They're in pretty poor shape to the north again. Yep. They're in pretty poor shape, not as bad as this. They should be able to last the winter. We do have some bandage patching that we need to do yet this summer up there, and probably later in the summer as well, but we expect that to be a full depth reconstruction. We don't expect to have to go as deep in correct soils on that roadway to the north, or the neighborhood to the north.
Councilor Whiting.
You mentioned this was a 2020 project, but I believe it was slated for much earlier but got pushed out.
So I'll go back to the map here. Find a better map. Oh, will my pointer work? So this project, the Wood Duck project, was slated with the extension of Wood Duck to the east and then the roadways to the south here. That was 2022. So this neighborhood to the north, we have in your CIP to be constructed in 2020, to be reconstructed, full depth reconstruction in 2020. And that's just a pavement reconstruction, a full depth pavement reconstruction. So you're asking, was it?
I thought we had it on earlier that somehow we don't remember how it got pushed out, but it was our last conversation on this.
So the Wood Duck Trail project. So yes, that was originally back in I forget my dates here off the top of my hand, but I think it was 2011 or 2014. And it was pushed at that time till now, obviously. Yep.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay. Existing conditions. So as part of the project evaluation, we did it in pretty short order, but we inventoried the existing infrastructure, including the roadways, the utilities, including the sanitary, the water main, the storm sewer, lighting, and private utilities. In this case, there is no sanitary or water main in this roadway, so it makes our evaluation a little bit easier. But the roadway was improved in 1994, so it's about 25 years old right now. It's a rural section of roadway without concrete curb and gutter, it's 28 feet wide with 5-foot aggregate shoulders and ditches. The lighting in the project area is pretty typical for street lighting in the city. So as part of the proposed improvements, we are proposing to rebuild the road. Pretty much it'll look to the dimensions as it is today, a 20-foot wide roadway with no curb and gutter, preserving the existing ditches. We do plan on removing the subgrade soils and replacing with the 2-foot sand section, and that would match the standards of the cities today. We also plan to install drain tile to ensure the subsurface waters will drain properly from the roadbed. As I indicated, there is no sanitary or water main proposed as part of this project. It should be noted that all the properties in this neighborhood on Wood Duck, they are on private septic and private well. With that said, we're reconstructing the roadway, so we would expect those properties to maintain their septics and their private wells for some time to come yet. And sewer and water are not readily available to this neighborhood. Project inconveniences. It's important to talk about the project inconveniences. We had a neighborhood meeting, which we had 3 residents attend, but we showed this slide as a note that the project is dirty, noisy, dusty, muddy, access issues, parking issues, vibration, you name it, mail issues, visitor issues. So some of you have been through these projects, so you know the inconveniences. We, as a city, we try to mitigate the impacts from all of those issues, so we'll do our best. We have a pretty good system. We will spray water for dust. We will sweep for the mud and tracking. We'll coordinate parking, access to homes, morning and evening, all of the above. So we do our best, and everyone has our phone numbers in case we have hiccups. We will have hiccups. So we ask everyone to call us. So inconveniences, tough to avoid. The restoration part of the project, we're gonna try to minimize any impact to the driveways, but if they are impacted, we do plan to replace with similar materials. If you have a concrete driveway, the impact that we have, we'll replace with concrete. There's a driveway out there with pavers, so we'll be salvaging and reinstalling them. And the bituminous asphalt driveways, we'll be replacing them with in-kind for the portions that we do disturb. We know there will be mailbox impacts, turf impacts. If anybody has irrigations, pet fences, we'll be restoring all those impacts to all of the above. That's pretty standard for the city reconstruction projects. All right, so the project budget is proposed. The expenses and funding are proposed to balance at $363,000 for this short segment of roadway, with a combination of funding sources including the Capital Improvement Fund, Storm Drainage Fund, and then, of course, the special assessments as outlined in Table 1. A special note, the special assessments are expected to total approximately $66,000. Per the city assessment policy, 30% of the cost of the street improvements are to be assessed. That's the general policy. So based on the estimated cost of the project, assessments were computed at $13,750 per lot per unit basis. There's a caveat in this special assessment guide, and it also guides us that in certain circumstances, when we have higher than typical assessment rates, some other caveats, that we perform a benefit appraisal consultation to help us determine if the proposed assessment exceeds the special benefit to the property. Specifically, that would be the increased property value as defined by state law. We must show that the benefit is greater or equal to the amount that we would assess on the property. So the consultation that we had with the benefit appraisal indicated that the $13,750 might be slightly higher than the benefit, so we are recommending a $12,000 cap on the assessment. The actual assessment will be based on the final project costs. So we're talking about it now. I'm recommending putting a cap on it now, but the assessment will be based on the final project cost, determined upon successful bidding, awarding, and completion of the project. So with that, if the final costs are lower, the assessment would be adjusted accordingly. However, if higher, I'm recommending, as indicated, the cap of $12,000. This has been done in the city before, recently in a neighborhood where we run into these similar type of issues with a high cost and the benefit doesn't match. So there is room in our special assessment policy to make exceptions to make these feasible projects. So again, the project costs that are assessed pertain only to the street improvements for the project. This map depicts which properties are being assessed. Per the city's special assessment policy, corner lots, which we have 3 of them, these corner lots are assessed for 50% of the project, noting that they are also assessed 50% of past and or future projects for their other frontage. Another special note, these properties along Wood Duck are unique. They're large rural residential lots. They're approximately 2.5 acres. They're 300 foot plus of frontage, so they're pretty large lots. What does that mean? There's less properties to distribute the cost, so that's why we have this higher than typical assessment cost. And it should also be noted that if we had curb and gutter, it'd be even higher. Curb and gutter is a pretty expensive component of projects, but we don't have that here. But that is why we see higher assessments on these type of rural large lot developments.
And it's on a per lot rather than a linear feet per lot, right?
That is how we're recommending and proposing. That's pretty typical on residential projects on how they have the similar benefit. If it was a larger lot, say it had 5 acres and it was 600 feet, we'd be recommending to double assess that one because they could be subdividable. But we do not have that here. The estimated interest rate that we have right now is 5.5%. That will be finalized during the final assessment hearing. We are recommending a period of 10 years per the city policy for the assessment payback period. And the annual payment will vary between, as you can see on this schedule, it'll vary between just under $1,300 to almost $1,900 annually, depending on what year we're in. Monthly, that equates to just over $100 to $155 per month. With that, the proposed schedule is in front of us. Plan approval, we're pretty far along with the plans here as part of our preliminary design with the feasibility study. But we are expecting to bring the plans back to you on July 16th to be approved. Then bidding and begin construction the end of August and completion yet this fall. So with that, I recommend additional public input and then a motion to close the public hearing, then consideration of comments and a motion to adopt the resolution ordering improvements and preparations of the plans and specifications. With that, thank you, and I stand for any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Questions of staff? Councilor Whiting?
Mr. Lillehog, this is a little late in the season to be bidding a project. Do we anticipate, I know it's a small project and it doesn't have a lot of work, do we anticipate any issues with bids?
I have my fingers crossed. Certainly, this is not ideal time to take bids, but we could find a contractor that has a little gap in their schedule. It's an easy project for a roadway type contractor. So our recommendation is to bid it. And if we do not get favorable bids, we will be bringing it back to you with a potential alternative plan. I can tell you what that alternative plan might be. Our hands are kind of tied here. It would be turning that road to gravel and having a gravel road over the winter until next year. There's not too many other options. So unfortunately, and that's why we crammed this project in this year, and we're not ideal with a bidding schedule right now. But fingers crossed, we're gonna make sure we rustle up some energy with contractors and contact them directly, letting them know that there's a good project here to bid on, and we'll see what we end up with.
Okay.
Other questions of staff? Other questions of staff? If not, thank you. This is a public hearing. Anybody else like to come forward and make comment on this proposal? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Hi.
Please make sure to speak into the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Wade Sides. I'm at 1938 Wood Duck Trail, so I was kind of right in the middle of that map.
Welcome.
I guess my point on this is that, there's a history with the road breakup and then 2011 and blah, blah, and so it brings us here, where the road failed this year. Now, the first half of that, when the map was up, basically that first section of Wood Duck down to Hohenstein was replaced as, I was told that the city did that but it was a grant from the county as part of the County Road 17 project for taking away accesses. So we have a crumbling road. We've had a crumbling road in front of our place for quite some time. I feel like part of that grant money or part of that access, by taking away those accesses, they increased the traffic on Wood Duck considerably because they forced the two additional neighborhoods onto Wood Duck to get to Marshall. So I think that should have been taken into consideration at the time. And the way it worked out is, the first half of the road got off scot-free. They got a great road, a 10-ton road. There's never going to be replaced. It stops at the corner. It leaves 7 lots that are left with this, project. As stated, 3 of the 7 are corner lots. There's 4 of us in the middle. It just seems really, really excessive to me, the amount that we're paying. I feel that if it was scheduled to be done in 2020, or let me ask you, if it's done in 2020, if it was done as part of the whole neighborhood, would it not be, that whole project be one cost then, and then equally divided between the, say, 20 houses? Or I'm talking down the road when we do, Maple Trail or whatever it is.
Steve?
Mayor and council members, yeah, we look at projects on a project-by-project basis. So the neighborhood to the north that we talked about in 2020, we do expect some areas to have some subgrade correction. and that is distributed over the overall cost of the project. We do not expect to see as in-depth the subgrade corrections that we have on this segment of roadway. So, yes, if this project was included with another project, there could be, savings because of economies of size and scale. Certainly that is a possibility.
I understand your concerns. I have a question in regard to trying to get more quantified data on 2011 of why that wasn't approved. Were you a homeowner there at that time?
Yes, I was. But I really don't know. I mean, we came to a council meeting and then it just kind of laid down. I don't
Right.
recall ever hearing anything about it.
They had talked about doing.
At that time, yeah, it was going to be from Marshall
Right.
to the end.
Okay.
But I'm not quite sure why, other than the road was, at that time, it was barely 15 years old. And we just didn't feel that the road should have to be, we should be assessed for a complete reconstruction at 15 years.
They were
I
talking
mean,
about milling it.
the road was put in, as a dead end,
Yep.
had 10 homes on it, very little traffic. Nothing against development or expect development, but, that additional wear and tear in the building of a lot of houses and a lot of cement trucks. And the other thing is the road was supposed to be 3.5 inches of bituminous in 1994 or whatever. When it breaks up and flies into the ditch, we've all picked up pieces, and I've never seen a piece that I felt was even 2.5 inches. To me, it looks like it's between 2 and 2.5 is what I would say. So I think the road was rather insufficient from the beginning, which has led to the breakup. The other thing is, since 2011, there's really been no maintenance on the road other than to come out in the spring and because every spring a different little section would break up, crumble, into pieces. They'd come out and cut that out, and patch it. But really that's been the extent of our maintenance. And I think we really could have gotten it to 2020 or, into the bigger project with, a little maintenance. I just think that's the most equitable way to do it, is to try and push it into the regular. It's really, you got four homeowners here that are really getting drilled, and the corner lots are not going to be, from what I understand, there's one of them's never going to see a project on that side. The other two are going to be more standard, mill and replace type. So we're just kind of in a bad spot right in the middle of the lot. Now, we were told that, you do have authority to, take things into consideration, and we just feel that this is a special circumstance. It's not normal, and it's...
Other gentlemen want to speak? If you want to speak directly into the mic, state your name and address for the record, and welcome.
How you doing? Joe Cybrant, 1915 Wood Duck Trail. Wade said most of what, kind of what we were feeling and thinking and talking about. And I'm going to go back to the situation with the road that, doing a major reconstruction on it, I just don't understand why, as a homeowner, we have to pay for corrections that, we keep claiming that there's been problems with this road for a long time. In 2011, our argument was, when we came in, was that, this road is only 15 to 17 years old, somewhere in there, and the way it looked was ridiculous. It was falling apart. So that's, I think, where, for me, and I think for these guys too, the hardest part is for the three of us, who are three of the four that are getting, as far as on the homeowner's side, taking the full instead of half, because we don't live on a corner. I'm going to propose this. If we got charged half like those corner lots, I'd walk out of here, you'd never hear another word from me. And I'm not so sure that the extent we're going with this road is, do we need to, I mean, we're out in the outskirts, we're not city lots, we've got 7 homes where there could easily be 14, which that's not the case, but it's just, it was a big wow when we got the information on this, and it really, please think about, I'd like to say we are special cases. I mean, we're kind of right in the middle of it. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mike Lee, 1815 Wood Duck Trail. I've only been here 4 years, but just from the time that I've been here, the amount of maintenance that's been done on this road, or even the little bit of patching that I've seen done is, I don't know, in my mind, shady at best. I think it's just a cover-up and, make it look pretty, make people happy. Like Joe and Wade both said, 4 of us here taking the brunt of this is, I think, ludicrous. From my understanding, and I can find some paperwork, it shouldn't be a problem at all, that this was supposed to be done quite a while ago. And there really needs to be some consideration taken into not just the 4 of us, but all of us in general who are living on a road that was built for the amount of houses that essentially we live on that stretch. What they've done beyond that, that's great. We all understand that expansion and it happens. But closing off a couple of entrances and exits, to the neighborhood adds traffic. There's all kinds of things that need to be taken into consideration here, I believe. It just feels like just getting the boot. And so more than anything, I just would like everybody here to think about what you're doing to 4 homes, 7 in total, but 4 homes are really, I mean, it hurts. It's not, it's not whether or not you can write a check and it goes away. That's not it. It's consideration for the people around you, the city you live in. We all pay our taxes. We all do what we're supposed to do. I think we would just like to see a little interest from other people to go, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to take a look at this. We kind of talked together. I don't know the full extent or the reason why we need to do a road to the full extent that they're looking to do. I don't think it's necessary. I think we could definitely get away with a cheaper version. It's been there 25 years with little to no maintenance. From what I can't vouch for it the whole time. I haven't been there. But from when I have been there, I mean, the most I've seen is a snowplow truck. So as this goes through, like we've been talking, and we're going to keep coming, and we're going to keep talking, and we're going to keep complaining, because I really think that there needs to be something said about how this ends up. Who does it? Who pays for it? Now, I understand as a homeowner, it's part of our responsibility. I get that. But I don't think it should be as deep as it seems to be going. So.
Thank you. I think our assessment policy is fair and equal. We use the same policy in your neighborhood as we use in Councilor Whiting's neighborhood, or Councilor Lehman had his road. I haven't had my road yet. Coming up on 22 years. So I think our policy is fair and equal. I think what looks at as this missed opportunity in 2011, I think the assessment was the estimate of assessment was a smidgen over $8,000. And, was that a missed opportunity? I wasn't there, but that didn't go forward. And now we have catastrophic failure of your road.
Correct.
8 years later, we can't leave you without a road. Trying to do this in a positive way. I, as a homeowner, understand the assessments but we also did a assessment benefit analysis and found that the value would be going up because of a new road, and we're capping that. Well,
I don't believe that either.
It's nice to have a new road, I'm sorry, but
well, if you had
expect, I mean, we
Right.
moved in with an asphalt road. That's what we expect. Now, after that nice dark black goes away, and it looks like everybody else.
Sir, can you please speak into the mic?
After that nice black coloring goes away on that asphalt and it turns to the lighter or medium
Yeah.
gray that,
Yeah.
you know, most roads look like. It's not, you know, people come up to look at a home that's for sale. They're not really, I don't think the question's asked very often about the shape of the road, and, you know, they would ask about it where we live right now. Okay, so.
Counselor Whiting.
You know, Mr. Mayor talked about, you know, some of us going through this project, and mine was in 2016 when we had our road redone. And I had the luxury of having a couple years' notice, so I knew it was coming. You could look at it both ways. You guys knew it was coming from 2011, or some of you did. And so you could see that the road was failing. You know, every homeowner in Shakopee is eventually going to pay for that road if they're there long enough. I know you talked about the more traffic, and unfortunately, the county did that project and cut off those accesses. We don't have any say in that matter. They shut off accesses as they want. And you mentioned that, you know, you don't think we need to go the full extent of the road, and we're not. You know, we're not doing sewer, we're not doing water, we're not doing curb and gutter. There's going to be some storm drainage. I think that'll benefit in the end. You know, my 60-foot lot was still around $3 or $4 grand that I had to pay, and I know your lots are a lot bigger, so it's kind of like Mr. Lillehog said, an economy of scale in which you end up having to invest in. We haven't voted on it yet, but we're talking about a cap on the project, and I think that's something that I would be in favor of. We want to do that to help out with the costs as a maximum for those double lots and everything. But it's unfortunate when you get a bill like this and not expect it. But we do also offer a fair interest rate for that 10-year plan if it becomes an issue. That's an option. You'll have to decide on your own whether you take advantage of that or not.
When we first started this process a month or so ago, and I do want you to know that this is a series of votes, and it will take some time. The bid contract is August 20th, and that's kind of one of the major steps in the proof in the pudding. If the bid is way up, we may reject it because it's unreasonable or bad timing, all those things. You know, obviously if it's lower, that's a benefit. So these are just the straight line estimates. And obviously things are higher, could come in lower from that. And I think Councilor Whiting is correct. This doesn't have a sidewalk or a trail or curb or gutter, and you guys are on your own wells and septic, so there's not a water connection fee and a sewer situation. So, but I hear you on this. I really look at it a real missed opportunity in 2011, and whether the road was deemed ready or not. I view it as that opportunity, right? And then it's just like an old car. You can kind of get it going, but then eventually here we are in 2019. Now the car's completely collapsed, and it's time for a new car, and we haven't had a payment in a while. No.
You know, I understand that. I would expect the road to be replaced sometime, and we were going to pay for it. Really, my biggest issue is digging down 3 feet to replace a base that wasn't, if it wasn't right when it was put in, you know, that's on someone. I don't know who. But they did do a couple core drills, and actually I would ask maybe Mr. Lillehog, what would be the worst thing if we just replaced the pavement, with 4 inches of tore it up, grade it, don't do the complete reconstruction part. That's the part of it that kind of sticks in my craw, that, why are we paying for reconstruction of the road? The repaving of it, I fully understand, and, I would expect that. It's that additional work that's, it's falling on a few of us.
I don't think we're gonna repaint the car. If a car doesn't run, we're gonna, replace the car and do it right so that you or the next owners would get, the 30-plus years out of it.
Understood, but you did some core drills, and we're told the base really isn't that bad. It's sandy clay, which said
Steve?
it isn't bad.
See how unpopular I can get here. So a couple scenarios. I could change a pavement section to a foot of sand rather than 2 foot of sand. It won't get under that cap, right? So it's not going to save any money on their cap, on the special assessment cap. It doesn't save that much in the cost of the road. I would say history will repeat itself. These aren't the worst soils in the material, but the road failed. Why? It's because they're there's clays in the soil. They're expansive soils. The subsoils got wet, and that's what happens. So you can have good clay materials when you build a road, but if they're constantly exposed to moisture and they get wet, this is what happens with the roadway. So I pretty strong recommendation on our pavement section. And then one other point I would make would be, and we run into this with new developments, so I mentioned the standards of the time. So maybe an easier example is when we get a development that comes in and we say put a sidewalk on one side of the street, the developer says, I'm going to pass those costs off to the prospective buyers on the property. So they raise the prices $1,000 per lot. Right. So my point is if the road back in the day would have been built to the standards that we now have, you either pay for it then or you pay for it later, if you understand my philosophy there. It didn't pay for it back in 1994-ish. They paid, the property owners that bought those lots paid for that section of pavement that was built there with the development. If they would have paid for 2 foot of sand, et cetera, and had a better subsection of roadway, they would have paid for it back then. Would it have been cheaper back then? Absolutely. That scenario didn't happen. So now let's pay for it later, and unfortunately it's a little more expensive. And absolutely, this is a special case, and that's why we did that special benefit appraisal on there to acknowledge that this is a special case, and that there's a cap for a reason, because our experts that looked at the benefit appraisal here says that by reconstructing this roadway as we're proposing, compared to many other projects throughout the metro, that you will add that value that I'm recommending to these properties on average. So that would be my explanation there. It's not always easy, but that's why we came back to you with a cap rather than just going the straight 30% like we do on every other project.
Other comments, gentlemen?
I would just thank you in advance for your consideration and ask you for some consideration.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Would anybody else like to come forward and make comment on this proposal? This is a public hearing. Would anybody else like to come forward and make comment on this proposal? Seeing none?
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Sorry, second.
I have a motion by Councilor Brennan, a second by Councilor Contreras to close the public hearing. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing is now closed. Councilor Whiting?
Mr. Mayor, this is a special consideration, and I know this is the point where we talk about, preparing the specifications and the bids. So we're not at the point where we know what the numbers are. So I think we still got some more windows to discuss this. So at this point, I would offer a resolution R2019-069, ordering improvements and preparations of plans and specifications for the Wood Duck Trail Reconstruction Project CIF 19-008, with the consideration that we're going to cap the cost to the homeowners at $12,000 maximum.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? I guess I kind of made my comments in the public hearing part. I think we've had a missed opportunity and then followed up by a major failure. And that's unfortunate, because we could have already had a road in and 6-7 years of use on that, but we did the benefit analysis. We are capping it. I've only seen that a couple times in our community, and I do know one homeowner that was involved in the last cap in our east end of our community, and I'll tell you, he thinks it worked out very well, and he got an improvement in front of his house. He has seen value of his home. The reason he calls me and tells me that is because he's really happy that his value went up, but then his taxes went up. So he lets me know, but he says it was fair and equitable on that cap, on that project, because of some uniqueness too. So as much as difficulty as this, we can't not fix your road. And we are using our city policy that I think is fair and equitable that we do in all neighborhoods. So those are kind of my views on this matter.
Yep, I think we have to provide a good quality road. We are not in the business we don't have a policy of just doing a mediocre road. So I think that's what we have to go with.
Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, residents. I would bring you to the August 20th when we consider awarding the bids. We'll have some more concrete costs. We all hope for lower costs. Thank you. Moving ahead then, item number 8, entertain a motion to recess for the EDA meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for recess for the EDA. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion, we are stand in recess, Mr. President.
We'll call to order the July 2nd, 2019 meeting of the Shakopee Economic Development Authority. Please make note of the roll. Before we approve the agenda, I want to make one correction on item number 5. We are going to adjourn to July 16th, not August 7th, if you want to make a note of that. And I will ask for a motion to approve that agenda.
Motion to approve agenda.
I have a motion by Contreras,
Second?
second by Brennan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We have one item on the consent business, item number 3. Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer the consent to business as stated.
A second?
A motion and second to offer the EDA minutes for consent. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Last item, we have item number 4, reports, is the EDA bill list. If you have any questions on that. Otherwise, it's just for your perusal. We don't need a motion on that. Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer adjournment of the EDA till July 16th.
A second?
A motion and second to adjourn the EDA to July 16th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll reconvene the city council.
We'll reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for July 2nd, 2019. We are on number 10A1, response to Shakopee Public Utilities, June 17th action. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council.
Okay.
Mr. Kursky is going to help me here for a second. I'd like to start off by saying that, you know, this is going to be a tough discussion. It's also going to be a necessary discussion, but even more importantly, it's going to be a factual discussion. I think that there has been a lot of unfactual information that's been floating around about what the city is doing, about the questions we're asking and why we're asking questions about things. And as you know, on the last SPUC meeting, SPUC essentially tabled without any action at all some really important questions that both staff and you had about the setting, mostly about the setting of fees for the organization. So I've been here 4 years. And during that time, I have received a lot of, the only way you can call them are complaints about Shakopee Public Utilities. And that's a fact. And it's also factual that, frankly, I wanted nothing to do with getting involved with the business of Shakopee Public Utilities. And my patented response, day in and day out, when I received comments from developers, from business owners who had projects that they were looking to move forward on, was very simple. This is not a city issue. This is a SPUC issue, and SPUC issues should be dealt with SPUC directly. And that literally was it for me. And that's all we were going to do, and that's all we were going to say, because it is not a city issue. Generally, the complaints that we received were multiple and could be put in 3 different areas. One, looping requirements. One, water connection charge and trunk water charges. Looping requirements, especially in the downtown area and with some of the bedrock and everything else that exists down there. And frankly, you know, the customer service mindset of Shakopee Public Utilities, which kind of reminds me of city government in earlier generations where, you know, well, we're City Hall, we're going to do this. And, you know, this is our policy, and therefore we're going to move forward with it. So just going back a little bit, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but SPUC really has the powers to do anything they want to. It really is ensconced in city code. They have the full, absolute, and exclusive control of and power over all the city water plants and systems and all light and power plants and systems. They have the power, after informing the council, and I'll get to that a little later, to fix rates and adopt reasonable rules and regulations for utility service. Again, this is not a city issue. It could not be more clear that this is a SPUC issue and SPUC fees. However, this city council does have the responsibility to appoint commissioners to SPUC. And all the commissioners that currently sit on SPUC have therefore been approved by the Shakopee City Council. So how did this become a city issue? Well, as a reminder, this all started in October with the Willie McCoy's restaurant issue. The developer, like every developer before them, came and complained about SPUC. That particular developer is very good at coming before council and attempting to have their needs, wants, and desires taken care of. And so when they came before council and complained initially about these fees, I told all of you that this was not a city issue, that this was a SPUC issue. And that when they came before us to ask for that, staff was not going to be in support of subsidizing SPUC fees. SPUC fees are a SPUC issue, not a city issue. We should not be in the business of subsidizing another government agency because of the impact that they're putting upon residents, business owners, etc. That's a SPUC issue, once again. That discussion did not find a solution. You tabled it for further look and asked staff to try to find some kind of a solution, which began a journey for me and my staff, intensive for probably 5 or 6 weeks, but certainly longer than that overall, of trying to understand the fee structure of SPUC and why they were set the way they were set. We, as the staff, meaning Mr. Burkett, Mr. Lillyhog, myself, Mr. Kursky, and Mr. Nelson, always came back to this one fundamental issue. How are these rates so incredibly higher than everybody else? How is it that everybody else can do it cheaper? That really is the crux of what we're talking about here. And the key is it's all about the rates. It's not about anything else. It's not about, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, some of the things that we're reading at this point. It really is, how are these rates established and justified? That's simply what we're trying to find out here. Well, as you know, we had a joint meeting with SPUC on March 12th, and during that meeting, there really wasn't much back and forth. It was basically presentations by both parts of the organization, both SPUC and the council. But going into that meeting, we requested information regarding the status of current rate formula for both the WCC, which is the water connection charge, and the WTC, which is the water trunk charge, to include any changes to the formula that SPUC would foresee. What we got was a historical basis for the initial establishment of the rate and no information on increases for the future. We also asked for a comparison of the SPUC, WCC, WTC rates for our neighboring and comparable cities. What we got was essentially a look at our neighbors here in Scott County and nothing else. We also asked for projected plans for the city water's infrastructure with an identification of the funding stream. What we got is a current copy of the CIP. And finally, we asked for an outline of water rates currently charged and any past recommendations from consultants regarding appropriate rate structures that were not followed and why they were not followed. We essentially got a copy of the current charges with no explanation as to how we got there, or any discussion in regards to recommendations from the past and why they weren't followed. So that brings us to the subsequent request for information that after staff worked on and then all of you looked at and replied to and comments incorporated on June 7th in 2019, and it really was based upon the stuff that we didn't find out in the joint meeting. Again, we're simply trying to figure out how these fees are justified. And essentially, we were looking at the water connection charge and the water trunk charge, how those rates are established, what information, report, or analysis was used to increase them dramatically, at least since 2003, which was a substantial increase, and then subsequently in 2007 and 2008. We also were wanting to know how the funds for those charges are currently accounted for and how they're planned to be used. As we look at the SPUC budget, that part of it that we can actually see, we see two different funds, a water and electric, without any breakdown underneath. That's concerning. We want to make sure that these funds are not being commingled. All of the questions in this particular letter, which is attached to the documentation for tonight's meeting, which is perfectly available for the public, all those questions go back to attachments that are SPUC's own analysis, own actions, and simply questioning, in a lot of cases, why did you do this? What was your analysis for this? What are the reports, or what backs this up? I want to switch gears a little bit here because this is where we go into just a lot of non-factual information, and I'm not going to spend too much time here, but it's really important to set the record straight on a lot of things. There was a recent editorial in the Shakopee Valley News. I'm sorry, it says A, it should be N. And I've taken some quotes off of this because I found it really over the top. Spuck, quote, has been under attack by the Shakopee City Council since its December meeting. The attacks have, quote, degenerated into ad hominem attacks against the commissioners by suggestions of incompetence, unprofessionalism, and just recently self-dealing or corruption. Well, the public can read our memos, they can read the letters, they can look at our meetings, and these claims are simply false. They're not true. We're again asking questions based upon factual information to hopefully get some kind of a justification for a fee structure. That's what we're doing. The comments continue. The city's first attacks against the commission arose from the Willie McCoy's development. Well, as we've already talked about, that's not what happened. The city was responding to a request at that meeting to use funds to subsidize Spuck fees. That was the issue. They were noted to be out of line with other communities because we did the research on it at the time. Again, I specifically argued that this was a Spuck issue and needed to be addressed by Spuck, and that I and the staff had no interest in getting involved, and that we can't prevent someone coming before council and making an application for assistance. And so, I couldn't say, I'm sorry, Mr. Developer, you can't come and talk to the council. This was a developer-driven idea, and it was a developer-driven request. The author then notes what I call the nefarious plot of the city. It was like reading a spy novel, and it's apparently about controlling all the money. So why is the city spending staff time and resources attacking another public body? Why are they trying to whip up public opinion by spreading false or disingenuous information, disparaging the intentions and professionalism of public servants on the commission and SPU's dedicated staff? The author continues, the answer became clear to me once I received the latest round of questions and quotes from the city administrator. It's all about controlling funds. That's really what this is all about. And the way this is explained in that opinion is that the city is going to shift new infrastructure costs for development onto the established users through increased rates. That we would increase usage rates for pre-existing users to increase the city revenue, so not to raise taxes. I hope I don't have to remind everyone again, as I do almost every other meeting, we had a tax cut this year. We don't just raise taxes. That's not what we do. And the author concludes that the city motivation is clear to have the system users pay for most or all additional costs of new development, leading to increases of 60 to 100% or more. I'm dying to see where the factual background, much like our questions have come from Spuck's factual documentation, I want to see the factual documentation of this, because the reality is this is pure fantasy. This is pure fantasy. This has never been discussed by any member of my staff. It has never been discussed with any one of you. This is so far out of left field. When I read it, I could not believe that this was even something that somebody was proposing. They had it all figured out. Ladies and gentlemen, this is once again about Spuck fees. We had complaints and have had continuing complaints about Spuck fees. We look at generally, and yes, they are way out of whack when it comes compared to comparable cities in the metro area. We are asking tough questions, and yes, they need to be answered. But again, they're based upon Spuck's own documentation, resolutions, and consultant reports. We're not making stuff up. It's all in and it's all documented throughout our requests and other information. So what we've had, both publicly and on social media, is this consistent deflection of not answering the questions and then finally tabling the request. And a few of the things I've heard is like, well, they've already been answered. No, they have not been answered. And if you feel that they have, please send us that answer. And this all can go away. Or the other answer that I've seen on social media is that commissioners were not there when some of this occurred. Well, you know what? Your professional staff was. And we would not tolerate somebody coming in here and asking for information and somebody saying, well, we weren't here then. You would charge us, I've been here 4 years, but guess what? You would charge us with finding out the information. We do that all the time with the members of the public that come into this building. So what are these crazy questions that we're trying to ask? Well, a little history. In 2003, a Spuck consultant recommended that the water trunk charge be increased from $574 to $2,045 to fund 2 new water treatment plants. Perfectly acceptable and reasonable concept. I don't see anything wrong with that whatsoever. But these fees have been collected since 2003. Where are they in the process? What planning has been done for them? If they're not in the CIP, when will they be added? These are the questions that I think are legitimate questions. Have there been any studies or other reports that outline the plan for these plants or a timeline for their construction? Have the system infrastructure requirements since that time facilitated these plants that will be built at some point, we presume, in the future? Another example of the questions we're talking about. In 2007, both the water connection charge and the water trunk charge were significantly increased an additional 12% over the construction cost index, which is what Spuck up to that point in time had used to justify their rates. It's perfectly acceptable. The construction cost index is what it says. It's the index that basically says the increase of construction costs over last year. However, the resolutions approving this noted that Spuck, quote, has observed that actual material and labor costs have escalated significantly above and beyond the amount indicated by the CCI, and determines an additional adjustment equal to 12% over and above the CCI is warranted. And those are noted in the resolutions 886 and 87 from the Commission. So we want to know what were the observations of actual material and labor costs, which is a quote from the resolution, based upon, since the construction cost index is that, and has been an accurate reflection of what those actual costs are. And were there any other studies or reports to support the contention that actual increases were 12%? Question number 3, in the very next year, so we just had that 12%, now we're going to have a 23% increase over the CCI for the water connection charge and a 24% increase over the trunk water charge, even though the Spuck consultant in a report that year specifically determined that the short-term deficit that everyone was concerned with would be transformed in the longer term to a $1.2 million surplus in the trunk water main fund, and the water connection fund will trend to a $21.7 million surplus. This is Spuck's own consultant. And the consultant recommended bonding that was the answer and not raise the rates in this particular scenario because even with increased rates, quote, the long collection period could still result in fund deficits in the short term depending upon the size of the increase and a large surplus in the long term. In other words, the consultant says he's not sure that'll fix the problem. Okay, so why did the commission not follow the recommendations of the consultant? That is a pattern on multiple occasions as we went back and looked at the history. It's a pattern of not following this particular consultant's advice, which was doing the financial analysis on these issues for 20, 30 years. Why continue to use them if their recommendations are not used on a consistent basis? What basis was there to make such drastic increases when the report specifically noted that the short-term deficit would lead to a substantial surplus in the long term of $1.2 million in one fund and $21.7 million surplus in the next? Those are important questions. The June 7th letter has all the other questions, as you well know, and the public can read the questions and read the background material as to why those particular questions were asked. But essentially, we question why the water delivery rate study was not being followed. The SPUC recommendation, the SPUC consultant once again recommended an increase of 10% per year from 2009 to 2015, once again because, as they said, the operating fund capital improvements are funded by the rates, and it is necessary that SPUC increase the rates to generate sufficient cash balance to fund their future capital improvement plan. SPUC chose to raise it 10% in 1 year during that period. Another question, why hasn't there been a rate study since 2009, which was good from 2009 to 2015? It's now 2019. We had questions in regards to SPUC's real economic development efforts. And yes, at the end, I asked the question, or I didn't ask a question, but I did talk about the $365 to hook up a donated splash pad. Bottom line, questions are not attacks. This is not a political issue. This is not some nefarious plot this is simply trying to understand how these fees, which are clearly larger than other communities, came to be. The analysis that this body essentially directed staff to move forward with was triggered by complaints from all major developers. You get phone calls from some of these developers. Every single major developer in this city at this point in time has complained about these fees, period. Fact. And some businesses with both future and past development plans. There are big corporations in this city that have just done major renovation work and improvements that I have met with on many occasions as they complained about some of these fees. The questions are based upon SPUC's own documentation and studies, and they were tabled. It's a blanket refusal to provide information to the public. But again, this is not a city issue. It really is not a city issue. It is a SPUC issue. But it, at this point, is also a public issue. Residents should have the ability to know how fees are being raised and what those increases are based upon. At the very minimum, that information should be known. You know, I read on social media as well about how transparent everyone is, and I can tell you since I've been here, it is not a transparent organization. When I first got here, I requested to see the SPUC budget. I got a 5-line document and was told that that was a SPUC budget. I said, no, I want to see the budget, not the assessment. He goes, well, we have to ask for permission. I'm not sure if I ever got that actual document, to be honest. And that they've adequately responded to the questions. Residents are pretty smart. They can judge it for themselves if they see transparency. They can judge if they see accountability, because the bottom line is we cannot force Spuck to do anything at all. They have the power to raise or lower their rates for any reason. I mean, there doesn't have to be a reason. They're not a regulated body, unlike a private utility that when they raise rates has to go to the Public Utilities Commission and request that. The oversight of the utility is the commission. But remember that, as it said in our statute, is that they really are supposed to come before you, or at least give you notice beforehand that they plan on raising rates. That's never occurred that I can find. It may have happened many, many years ago, but I have found no evidence of that. And it's clear that they can totally ignore questions posed by staff and by council. I mean, they have that power. They can do that. So I'm looking forward to saying this once again in the future. This is not a city issue. This is a Spuck issue. And Spuck issues should be dealt with Spuck, not the city. And my recommendation at this point is that, we don't have the power to do anything. And from my perspective, we've looked at it, we've asked the questions, we have not received appropriate responses. This is bigger than this body, and there's nothing that we can do to move the process forward. So with that, I will be happy to questions, comments. Any of the staff that worked on this can also provide enlightenment as well. But that's where I am.
Councilor Whiting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe you answered many of these questions, but I'll kind of go through my list to make sure I hit everything and maybe reiterate it. But my first question had to do with the June 7th letter. We supplied a list of questions, and to date, none of those questions from the June 7th has been answered because you said they tabled all those.
We have received nothing in regards to our inquiry.
Okay. In the article, June 29th, the author suggests there are looping requirements that ensure there's enough water pressure for fire protection. Who makes that requirement?
I believe, and maybe, I don't know if Steve knows this or not, but I have read some of the reports that talked about that, especially in the downtown area, and it certainly was a concern many, many years ago. I presume that Spuck is the organization that makes that determination. Steve, I don't know, can you shed some light?
Mayor and council members, that just follows a longstanding Spuck policy, is my understanding, how they systematically have the grid prescribed for the whole city. So it's based on their policy.
Because it mentioned, water pressure for fire protection in this article, but they also mentioned that the oversizing of the underground pipes is also stated that for that same purpose. So I guess, is it the oversizing, or is it the looping, or is it both? And I guess maybe a fire pump engineer might be able to help with water volumes and things, I know, but we'll skip on by that one. In the same article, when the city council was approached by Willie McCoy's restaurant for relief for the water connection charge and the water trunk charge, the author suggested rather than using the development funds at its disposal, because Willie McCoy's didn't pay their employees sufficient wages, that was the quote. He's referring to our economic development subsidy policy that calls for a specific wage level. And prior to voting to utilize those funds, they'd have to have those wages in place. But would the city ever use economic development subsidy funds to subsidize the fees of another agency? I think you answered that too.
No, absolutely not. I would never recommend that. Council obviously can decide to make that determination. But from a professional staff perspective, that would never be a recommendation that would come from us.
All right. And a few more, if I can continue on, a couple more?
Go on, yeah.
Sure. To my knowledge, the Shakopee City Council has never discuss shifting the cost of expanding the water infrastructure to the citizens. We've never talked about that. You mentioned that. We've never had that conversation. It's never in any of our documents. People can watch our meetings. It's and view all
We don't
of
have
our...
the power to do that,
Right.
Councilman.
So that was part of that article, too. In the past, the public utilities had an independent rate study. You talked about that, suggested increasing the water rates. So rather than do that, the city wants to, they say the city wants to shift the cost of expanding the water infrastructure to the citizens, but actually, SPUC owns the water rate studies, and that was suggested to them that they disregarded, and you mentioned that too.
Yep, and that was part of the 2009 study, which specifically talked about the necessity of doing that.
So by their own actions, the public utilities is indeed subsidize the water rates by increasing the water trunk charges and the water connection charges. You mentioned this too a little bit, but to date, we've had several developers come before us here at the council stating that the fees of the public utility is charging is higher than other communities. And I mentioned Mr. Sewell from D.R. Horton was here, Mr. Bannerman from Willie McCoy's. I know the Public Policy Committee of the Chamber has discussed this.
Yeah, the Public Policy Committee of the Chamber actually did a study a year and a half, 2 years ago at this point, on city fees because of the costs. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion of that is that the city fees were not the issue. The SPUC fees were the issue.
And I know from talking to some residents that, Mary over at the Babes Place, they used to be to my left when the old city council, but there was issues there. They had to put in the water protection, which is their fire code and things, but the charge to hook up to that water, a building already connected to water, were astronomical in her point of view. So have we done research as to what other cities are charging for development and what are the differences between the relationship that we have with SPUC and the relationships that other cities have with their public utilities?
We haven't done anything relation-wise. That's very difficult to try to get a grasp on because I think that every utility has differences. However, we certainly have looked at the rates compared to others, and we've shared that. We've shared that, you all have seen that. We've shared it publicly, and you can see very clearly that among our comparables, and by the way, when we talk about developers complaining, they're not complaining just about our comparable cities being lower. They're talking about other cities that they deal with in the Twin Cities and how far out of bounds these particular fees are. But again, you all have taken those calls.
Yeah. And a couple more here. I'll try and wrap it up. The project down at the old City Hall site, that was discussed a long time ago, and after the project was approved, from my understanding, at the last hour, public utilities came forward and drop a bunch of requirements and costs in order to begin that construction. What were those changes, and what did it cost the project, and also who paid, and who would have how would that have happened in other cities?
Michael, you've dealt with that project more than anybody.
Mayor and Council, I think there was an agreement between the City of Shakopee and Shakopee Public Utilities when the lines were undergrounded that Shakopee Public Utilities provides the power, but it's the city's responsibility to basically maintain that underground wiring. So as part of that project, if you remember, there are 2 transformers on the old City Hall site, one up where the building used to be and one in the rear. The transformer up near the building has to be moved because it's where the building's going. That requires the alley to be opened up, all the conduit moved, and all of the existing properties, I think there's 4 or 5, have to be served from that new transformer. So that just the electrical costs today on that project's about $165,000 without including the breaking up the alley or doing a new alley there.
But wouldn't in other cities the utility pay for that?
It depends what the agreement is with the city. I mean, clearly at some point back in the 90s, the city council at that time agreed that they would pay for that. I don't think the council or SPUC thought that would come a time when City Hall would be demolished and that all would have to be moved. And so that's coming out of the TIF. So basically the taxpayers are paying for that.
That was my thought. Thank you. The last thing I pointed out, the Shakopee Public Utilities Governance Handbook. I happen to have a copy that states under Governance Principles, item number 5, it's quote, although independently governed from the city of Shakopee, SPUC is part of our local government, and the commission shall coordinate with the city to promote improved value to our community and increase economies of scale. That's the end of the quote. That's their guiding principle. And as the city administrator, do you feel that SPUC is acting using that stated principle?
The utility and the city have had long-standing issues way before I got here. And for whatever reason, there are often times it seems that the city and the utility are at odds. And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. This is a tough period. I think that it's important for the public to understand what a public utility is doing in regards to setting of fees. I have a problem with that information not being available to the public.
Well, I do. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Brennan?
I've been in a lot of discussions lately regionally about housing and building costs and the effect of the high fees on the ability to bring housing and commercial development into our region. The City of Shakopee staff has identified the Shakopee Public Utilities determination of water connection charges and water trunk charges as an extraordinarily high fee put on our business owners and housing developers. I feel it's now the councilor's responsibility to address this issue as representatives of our community. I personally can't turn a blind eye on this. At the June meeting, SPUC meeting, Mr. Crooks presented the letter and received from the city administrator dated June 7th. This letter asked the SPUC to answer specific questions regarding SPUC capacity and trunk water calculations and charges. SPUC made a motion to accept the letter, but directed the SPUC staff to take no action to respond. I would like to have the city council members show a dissatisfaction with this vote and to show our support to the city of Shakopee staff. I'm asking Mayor Mars and Councilor Lehman to respond to SPUC in writing and jointly present at the next SPUC meeting the fact that we do not agree with this action and that we would like SPUC to reconsider this vote. I would also like to have the Shakopee Public Utilities complete a fee analysis and financial audit by an independent auditor approved by the City of Shakopee. If it is determined that the fees are out of line and are not truly representative of the WAC and water trunk charges, I ask the council to direct SPUC to rectify this immediately. If the audit determines that the fees are based on a true cost in Shakopee, I ask council to direct the staff to provide a complete analysis of the process to bring Shakopee Public Utilities back under the City Council. The reason for this is to, if there's nothing that the public utilities can do, then we need to look at other ways to reduce the cost by combining efforts in finance, in HR, in other ways, and put it back under City Council. I like to see both the pros and cons presented in a way that the community can read and decipher clearly, so they have a clear understanding of what's going on. And that at that point, we can move forward and determine what we need to do. I don't know if I have to put that in a motion or 3 motions or.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would second or concur. I'm not sure we'll get the answers you're looking for. Through our discussions tonight, they have we can direct them or ask them to do things, but they may or may not respond.
Yep.
But I would second your that as a motion, and maybe we can get it in writing for the city staff, but.
Motion on the table to write and present a letter?
And to also complete a fee analysis and financial audit by an independent auditor that's been approved by the city of Shakopee. And also, well, and then move forward at that point.
Mr. Thompson?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of council, just to be sure staff has clear direction on this, and because this is a very public issue, I think it's important that it's clear what direction you're giving staff and the mayor. So it might be better to break that down. And I heard 3 different things.
Yep.
That maybe do one at a time and make sure we get clear direction from the council. If they're giving the mayor direction or they're giving staff direction. So it's just clear, that's all. So perhaps one at a time would be better.
Okay. I am asking Mayor Mars and Councilor Lamern to respond to
Wait,
Buck.
Councilor Brennan?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll withdraw my second and go with Mr. Thompson's recommendation.
And one thing is Darren has pointed out, Spuck has an audit every year. So I'm not sure that would be necessary.
Okay. So we looked at,
Motion on the table. It dies for lack of second. Councilor Brennan.
okay. I would like to ask Mayor Mars and Councilor Lehman to respond to Spuck in writing and jointly present the letter at the next Spuck meeting to compel them to respond to the letter that Councilor or Administrator Reynolds had.
You mean the June 7th questions, right?
Yep.
So, motion on the table?
I would second that and ask for your.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with writing the letter and presenting it. I can't speak for a counselor that's not here.
I chose Mr. Lehman because he is our liaison.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, just one point on that one. I think I heard the word compel in there. First time I think I heard to ask them to reconsider their action. You really can't compel, I think.
Ask for
reconsideration of their
Right.
tabling motion is probably a better way to word that.
Okay. I'll correct that again.
And I would accept that correction.
So I can do this absent of Counselor Lehman. Move forward with that. I guess if he said no, then I would still do it. Okay. Is that acceptable?
Yep, I would hope that he would, considering that he's our liaison.
Motion on the table in a second. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Counselor Brennan.
I make a motion to have Shakopee Public Utilities complete a fee analysis by an independent, and I put financial audit in there, but you're saying that we already have that, by an independent auditor approved by the city of Shakopee.
I'll second that with an amendment to request Shakopee Public Utilities, because we, I don't know what word you used that time. Was it compel or
Is that a second on the table?
yes?
So that was what I asked directly of their board many months ago for that fee study by an independent financial firm rather than some of their studies have been done by Sean Matson and more water engineering type people want to see a financial out. I don't know if they've started that or not. Ask,
Okay.
acceptable? Motion on the table in a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next.
If it's determined that the fees are out of line and not a true representative of the WAC and water trunk charge, I ask council to direct SPUC to rectify this immediately. If the audit determines that fees are based on a true cost, I ask council to direct staff to provide a complete analysis of the process to bring Shakopee Public Utilities back under the city council.
Second.
You second that? So you're basically saying they do a study and then follow the recommendation of that?
Right. And if it is a true cost, if it's determined that fee is in line with the doing business, then we need to move forward to bring Shakopee Public Utilities back under the city council.
Just comments.
Discussion?
Yeah, discussion. I think our motion, or our direction there would be to put it on a ballot measure, request a ballot measure to move it forward, I think.
I'll take
Because
that
we
amendment.
can't really do that. but-
All right, repeat your motion again. I'm sorry.
If it's determined, if the study determines that the fees are out of, if it's determined that the fees are out of line, are not a true representation of the water connection charge and water trunk charge, I ask council to direct SPUC to rectify that immediately. So bring that cost back into line. If this audit determines fees are based on a true cost in Shakopee, I ask council to direct city staff to provide a complete analysis of the process to bring Shakopee Public Utilities back under city council by way of
A ballot measure.
a ballot measure.
If they're in line?
Yeah, I think, because if they're in line with the results, are we ready for discussion here? But if they're in line, then they would represent what their true costs are.
All right.
To me, that would mean that
All
they showed that their fees are legitimate, I guess.
That's right. But so we would have to come up with other ideas, like combining the finance department, combining the HR department, and combining the administration. Reduce that fee.
So just a point of locality here, we have a memo from Jim Thompson in regard to that at the several year points was about petition and referendum, and from how I read it, the city can't initiate that on their own, is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the statute that governs this discusses two things: abolishing a Public Utilities Commission and or transferring the jurisdiction of the Public Utilities Commission back to the city. Okay. If abolishing is the issue, that question can be put to the voters either by the city council on its own, or the city council is required to do that if you receive a petition signed by the requisite number of voters. So if you're talking about abolition of the Public Utilities Commission, that's the process. The transferring of jurisdiction is slightly different. What that process is the same thing. It still requires a vote of the electorate, but the city council does not have the authority to, on its own, put that vote. It has to come from a petition. So transferring, and if you do it, if it's the transfer of jurisdiction question, the statute authorizes transferring all but not some, but not all. In other words, for example, you could, the petition or the vote could be on transferring the water utility to the city, but not the electric, or vice versa, or both. So there's a little bit of more of a decisions to make if that were to be the case.
Well, then
So that's the general process. What I'm hearing is combining departments. I'm not sure that's an option. So
that's why I think the
yes,
motion I
right.
struggle with.
Yes.
I get the abolishment, I don't think we're trying to do that, but through this analysis to combined, and then we can't initiate that, so that's at the tail end of your motion, Councilor Whiting.
The other point you mentioned the petition, and in your memo, you discuss that a petition would require signed by 15% of the electorate voting in the last previous city election. And I'm not sure what that number is, but that's, we probably had a pretty good turnout.
Probably.
Yeah, so that'd be a lot. So I think the portion of trying to remove a portion of it would be hard to reach that standard, but the abolishment, we could do at a city council level.
But,
Just to be clear, you can submit it to the voters at the city
Yes,
council letter, but
yes,
the
that's
voters
right.
still have to vote on it.
Yes.
that wasn't in the motion, so I apologize. I think the way that I understand the motion is that the last part of it, we can't act on it.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to help move this along if I can. I'm wondering if the better way to phrase this would be just to request the rate study, that they do it and they report back on the study to the city council. If you just stopped it there, when that happens, you can then make decisions based on what the report says or what they give you back. I don't know that you have to precondition or make decisions
The outcome,
now
right.
on the outcome.
I
So-
agree.
So perhaps that might be a better way than hold the second portion till you get the information you're looking for.
I'll remove my second.
The second withdraws the motion. I have a motion on the table. Second. Motion fails for lack of a second. Counselor Brennan.
I would like to make a motion to have Shakopee Public Utilities complete a fee analysis and financial audit by an independent auditor approved by the city of Shakopee, and to bring it back to the city council.
Wait, is that okay, the second part?
Okay.
But
I'll
I
second.
think the word financial audit snuck back in there, and as Darren, they do an audit every year. I think what you're requesting that they do a rate study prepared by an independent financial firm, and report that information back to the city council after it's completed.
Great.
Okay, I have a motion on the table.
I think you're good.
And a second.
I have a second. I can support that. I don't know where they are with that ask. This is the same ask that we had at our joint meeting. And I'd love to see that refreshed data, because the data that we have is very outdated. So I can support that, and then once we get that, we can find a way forward. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Before we move off this topic, I have a lot of history here. And for as long as I've known, the relationship between the city and the utility has not gone well. Even in lieu of change of leadership at both organizations, somewhere along the line, I don't feel we're integrated partners for the benefit of the community. And I do know that Spuck's role is slightly different than the city, but we need each other, right? To grow, to prosper, to be successful as a community. I remember getting on that board and asking the manager to work on that relationship with the city and make it better, because it's out there. Oh, it's a perceived thing. No, over the years, it's real, and it hasn't improved. And that's concerning. And that's been going on for a long time. Councilor White?
I just would like to add that comment, the principle in their governance policy, and read it again. You know, although independently governed from the city of Shakopee, SPUC is part of our local government, and the commission shall coordinate with the city to promote improved value to our community and increase economies of scale. That's their principle. I think it's sound, and it's kind of like what we're talking about. I think if we can get to that point, I think we'd be okay.
As Mr. Reynolds said, I sure do get my share of questions about SPUC, and knowing the different organizations, I certainly try to get them and steer them to the utility. Get in front of that board. Been doing it for several years now. being a person that was on that board for 10-plus years, I can count on one hand and have extra fingers of how many folks, developers, residents that ever came before that board. And so not a lot of public input, whether they're interest or not, but if there's issues with a developer of all kinds, they never came before the board. The latest, biggest one that became news was Willie McCoy's. I told both the developer and the owner directly to go to email the manager and the board members and get in front of that board and present, right, at a public meeting. I don't know if that ever happened. Been talking for several years with the developer on the West End. He gave me numbers about his fees for his area over there, and it is almost within a couple $1 million of the entire infrastructure build out of the utility. I do have inherent history on some of these fees, and when I saw it in totality at our joint meeting about how much our fees have gone up over the last 10 or 15 years, as someone that sat on that board and now taking a retrospective view of it, I was taken back, going, boy, the effort of my work and trying to do the right thing here has this cumulative effect of these fees. But directing back directly to the 2008 revised report from the water cost analysis, cost of service fee, we're looking at a deficit in the water connection charge. And at that time, we did vote to increase that. We did vote to increase it and add a 2% kicker. However, my recollection was that the 2% kicker was to be looked at individually annually and not just an automatic. Also, take you back in time in history, because I think this is vitally important. January 2008, our community was growing, and SPUC was looking at 3 different locations that was on their CIP back then. 2 of them were in the west end, or on the east end. One on the plateau off of 16 and one on the hill off of 18. Mullenhart Road. Couple big projects. $6-7 million worth of infrastructure there. And then, of course, we were looking at the west end for development. And that was going to be, of these 3 pieces, a big hunk too. Matter of fact, the west end estimate was going to be as great as those 2 pieces in the west and the east end, because we had to build a tank, booster station, etc. Funny thing occurred though, as you try to do strategic long-term planning and trying to raise rates. My idea was, and right here on page 7 of 24, table A, we were running a deficit. Maybe we can shore up those funds. We're not going to need that tower directly today or next year, but we will. Maybe we can help the deficit. And then when a couple years go by, maybe we can shore up the deficit, and then maybe we can bond. We had a financial analyst in-house too, that maybe out of this $14 million that was identified in the CIP back then, that maybe we could use some cash and then bond for the rest. I come from a financial background, that kind of made sense to me. But again, let's talk about history and a place in time, 2008. What happened over the next couple of years? Major recession that hit our whole U.S. economy. Also of significance is that there was a developer that went bankrupt and a purchase by the Shakopee, Minnewacan, Sioux community. And that basically took those 2 east end projects and made them null and void. So you have raising rates, a CIP that's way up here, but 2 of those projects are no longer appear feasible. we always felt that we always felt the West End was going to be our next area of focus. So here we are today with rapid growth out there, they're building, and yet I know that we don't want to put a booster station and a tank in the ground 3 years before the construction of need. I understand that. But the last plat that we developed for Windermere had that they could only build 29 homes until that booster station is up and running. To me, that's an impairment to development. I look at other cities, I've seen our comparables. We had a joint meeting with the utility, and they have other comparables that makes it appear that they're cheaper. Makes it tough for a pure analysis. I watched the tape of the recent meeting where they accepted your letter and then tabled it. I've never seen a government agency take another government agency letter and accept it and then take no action. A few days later, one of the commissioners had issue with our city staff, city council, and me. Like I said, I have my hand on some of this. But when I see it as a possible impairment to development, when I have developers calling me, took a call just this week, took 3 last week. Yes, get them to Spuck. That makes it difficult because, yes, as Mr. Reynolds said, they want to come here. These are Spuck issues, and as I mentioned in our joint meeting, the board members, they sit on a board, they set policy and procedure, and they can make changes accordingly. This article mentioned that Mr. Reynolds can just go down the hall and talk to the mayor. Well, you know what? We do all the time. And I tell them about the phone calls I receive and the impact on straight line development, and also the impact on redevelopment, because now we're entering a phase that we haven't had for a while, that is redevelopment, and that's more difficult, and unfortunately, it's more expensive. But we all want our organizations to be effective and efficient. We also want them to be responsive to the needs of their community. Accountability, organizational effectiveness, and I think I can hardly wait for the cost of service study so that we can have those numbers and look at the rates and see, because I talked to my peer mayors across other towns. Yes, is their structure different, or they have the water department in-house? And some do, some do. Some get water from Minneapolis, so there's no connection charge. A lot of those communities have topography issues as well, just like Shakopee. First high level, second high level, they have all that. Some don't, and that's fine. But I think we should all look at this together. And I don't think the combativeness that I've seen, that doesn't do either entity any good. Let's find solutions for 2019 and decades into the future that can have positive outcome for the community. We all have a vested interest. So I'll look forward to the opportunities that we face moving forward. But that's kind of what I want to say and on the record. Yeah. Further discussion? Okay. Our motions have been passed. Moving ahead then. 11A, our city bill list for our review. Any questions on that? Otherwise, we would move ahead to Liaison reports, Counselor Brennan.
I went to the Beacon Interfaith Forum last week. There were speakers. They were Sheriff Hennon's, St. Francis Hospital, Scott County, and Beacon Interface. They discussed the needs of low-income housing in Shakopee and the homelessness, or in Scott County and the homelessness. And then yesterday I went to the promotional swearing in at the fire department. So congratulations. That's it.
Thank you very much. I just have a short report. Went to the firefighter leadership swearing in on Monday. I also met with staff. Great to see the turnout from fellow council members at the swearing in. I think that means a lot to our fire department, so I do appreciate that. That's all I have. Councilor Whiting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had the Main Street meeting on the 19th and talked about the farmers market and the Rhythm on the Rails that's coming up soon. On the 26th, I had the MVTA meeting, and we had a presentation on the 2018 CAFR, those fun annual audits that we get to go through for different organizations. And also the Apple Valley Transit Station modernization presentation on some of the projects they're working on there. There is a change to one of the routes that for part of Savage and part of Burnsville, the route wasn't really materializing with ridership, so they went to the kind of like the dial-a-ride system we used to have here in Shakopee. Yeah. So that's actually the ridership. The first few weeks was the same as the ridership of the bus route, so that's a great opportunity for them. They're looking at things like that for low ridership bus routes and how they're going to adjust it. And that's something the MVTA is constantly doing. And as you mentioned, I was at the swearing in yesterday. Congratulations to our 2 new lieutenants on the fire department.
Councilor Whiting, thank you very much. Councilor Contreras?
Thank you. Just on the 25th, I attended the Scott County 2020 Census Complete Count Committee, which pretty much just discusses where and how to connect with our historically undercounted population in Scott County. On the 27th, I attended the GEAR cohort, which is the racial equity team, and that is how to integrate racial equity into the processes, working on a vision there. And then on the 27th, again, the Shakopee Diversity Alliance, which again is still looking for volunteers to make this even possible. And again, that is Friday, August 2nd, 2019, from 5 to 9. On the 28th, my daughter and I went to the Happy Birthday America Parade, which was lots of fun. And it's harder to ride your bike when you're going slow. It's really hard. And not to hit all the little, everybody else who was there. That was a challenge. And yesterday, again, like you guys all said, I was at the ceremony, the swearing in of the firefighters. That's it.
I saw your pictures from the Happy Birthday America parade.
I'm like walking on the bike.
You look good.
Thank you, Councilor. Administration report, Mr. Reynolds.
Nothing today, sir.
All right. Councilor Lehman's not here, but item number 12, other business. Other business before this board? Seeing none, we would move to our closed session with a motion and also a mention of the state statute. Councilor Whiting?
Make a motion to go into closed session to discuss property acquisition as pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05 Subdivision 3C. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, and Mr. Mayor, the open meeting law requires us to identify the property. My understanding, the property is approximately 14 acres on Bluff Avenue, adjacent to Huber Park.
Thank you. I have a motion on the table.
And a second.
And a second by Councilor Contreras to go into closed session. Further discussion? Discussion before we close, if people leave and don't come back, we want to make sure that all our residents have a safe and secure and sound 4th of July holiday over the next many days. So happy birthday, America. Motion on the table and a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We will be in closed session.